Rain hammered the windshield the night everything changed forever. I flagged a cab and slid into the back seat. Our eyes met in the rearview mirror. And I froze. "Where to?" she asked. But I forgot my answer. 6 months later. She stood at my engagement party uninvited. My mother's face went white when she saw us together. "I have to tell you something," Maya whispered, shaking. What she said next would break my whole world open. My name is Jenna Michaels, 28. A graphic designer living in Chicago, 3 years removed from a small Iowa town that never understood me. This is the story of how one rainy night, one stranger, and one impossible love taught me the true cost of living an honest life. That November, I'd stayed late at the agency finishing a campaign, and the storm outside had turned Michigan Avenue into a river of red taillights. I nearly missed her cab, waving my arm through sheets of rain until she pulled the old yellow sedan against the curb and popped the door. Inside, the radio played something soft and unfamiliar, and the driver glanced back at me with a smile that felt oddly, impossibly familiar. "Rough night?" she asked, easing into traffic. And I laughed despite myself, surprised that a stranger could read my exhaustion so easily. Her name tag read Maya Torres, and her dark curls were damp from running between fares, sticking slightly to her forehead. We talked the whole ride. About nothing important. About traffic and terrible bosses and the particular loneliness of a Chicago winter. When we reached my building, she turned off the meter early and said the last 5 minutes were on the house. I laughed and told her that was terrible business, and she said some people were worth the loss, then looked away, embarrassed. I gave her my number before I could stop myself, scribbled on a coffee receipt, telling her to text if she ever needed a friend. She texted that same night. Just 3 words made it home, and something in my chest loosened for the first time in months. We started talking every day after that. First about music and bad reality shows, then slowly about the things that actually mattered. I didn't call it anything yet, not even to myself, but I found myself checking my phone every few minutes, hoping for her name. Maya was studying nursing part-time, driving the cab to cover tuition after her mother's medical bills had drained their savings dry. She told me about growing up in Pilsen, about her father leaving when she was 9, about learning early that nothing came free. I told her about Cedar Falls, about my father the retired police captain, my mother the school teacher, and their careful, narrow expectations of me. "They still ask when you'll bring home a nice boy?" she asked one night. And I said yes, constantly. And she went quiet for a while. I didn't know yet that her question wasn't casual curiosity, that she was quietly asking whether there was room for someone like her. We started meeting for coffee between her shifts, always somewhere quiet, always lingering longer than either of us admitted we wanted to. The first time she laughed for real, head thrown back. I realized I'd been waiting all week just to hear that sound again. I told my best friend Priya about her, careful with my words, calling her just a friend, though Priya's raised eyebrow said she wasn't fooled. One rainy Friday, Maya picked me up not as a fare but as something else, and neither of us mentioned the meter at all. We drove along the lake with the windows cracked, and she told me she hadn't dated anyone seriously since a bad breakup 2 years back. Anyone felt like a careful word, and I asked, gently, if she meant men or just anyone, and she met my eyes and said anyone. That was the moment I understood, clearly, what I'd been circling around for weeks without letting myself name it out loud. I didn't sleep that night, replaying every glance, every silence, wondering if I'd imagined the current running between us the whole time. 2 weeks later, at a rooftop bar after her final exam, she reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. "Is this okay?" she asked quietly, and I answered by leaning in, and the city lights blurred around us like something out of a dream. We kissed for the first time under a string of patio lights, rain starting again softly, as if the whole sky approved of us. I walked home that night unable to stop smiling. terrified and thrilled in equal measure, already knowing this would not be simple to explain. The next morning I woke to a text from her. "Does this scare you too?" And I typed back, "Terrifies me. In the best way." We became careful about who saw us together, choosing restaurants in neighborhoods where no one from my old church crowd would recognize me. Priya figured it out within a month, catching us holding hands at a diner, and to my relief she simply smiled and ordered pancakes. "About time," she said. "I've never seen you laugh like that with David," and I flinched. Because David was a conversation I'd been avoiding. David was my mother's favorite subject. The son of her closest friend. A man I'd dated on and off since college out of habit. My mother had been not so subtly planning our future for years, mentioning wedding venues the way other mothers mentioned the weather. I hadn't told Maya about David yet. Not because I was hiding a relationship, but because I didn't know how to explain the pressure behind it. One night she asked directly, "Are you seeing anyone else?" And I told her the truth, that David was history, just my family's hope. She studied my face for a long moment, then said, "Just don't let hope become a habit that swallows you." And I promised her it wouldn't. We spent that whole spring falling deeper. Slow Sunday mornings. Her old records playing while she studied and I sketched at her kitchen table. She kept a photo of her mother on the fridge. And once she told me quietly that her mother didn't know about her yet either. "We're both hiding pieces of ourselves," she said. "Maybe that's why we understand each other so well." And I couldn't argue with that. By June, I'd stopped imagining a future without her in it, though I still hadn't found the courage to say those words aloud. We took a weekend trip to Michigan, just the two of us. And for 3 days we didn't have to explain ourselves to anyone. On the beach at sunset, she told me she loved me first, voice trembling, like she'd been holding the sentence for weeks. I said it back before she'd even finished, and we stood there laughing and crying at the same time, the lake wind wrapping around us. Driving home Sunday night, we made a quiet pact to figure out the rest together, whatever telling our families would eventually cost us. I believed then that love alone could soften any hard conversation, that my parents would come around once they truly saw how happy I was. Maya was less certain, having grown up watching an aunt get disowned for loving a woman, but she let me hold on to my hope anyway. That summer felt like borrowed time, golden and easy. The two of us building a private world neither family knew existed yet. I didn't realize how fragile that world was until my grandmother's health took a sudden turn, and everything sped up faster than we were ready for. My grandmother, Eleanor, had raised my mother almost single-handedly, and her opinion carried weight my mother had never once dared to challenge. When she was hospitalized with heart failure, my mother called a family meeting, and I flew home to Cedar Falls not knowing what waited for me. My mother met me at the airport already talking about David, about how Grandma Eleanor wanted to see me settled before anything happened to her. "She's asking about a wedding," my mother said, gripping the steering wheel. And I told her it was practically decided, and my stomach dropped. I hadn't agreed to anything, but somehow my silence over the years had been quietly translated into consent by everyone around me. At the hospital, my grandmother took my hand and said she just wanted to see me happy before she was gone, and I couldn't correct her. David showed up that evening with flowers, playing his part perfectly, and my father clapped him on the back like a son already. I called Maya from the hospital parking garage, whispering into the phone, telling her everything felt like it was slipping out of my control. "Tell them the truth," she said gently, "or at least don't let them plan a wedding you never agreed to," and I promised I would try. But every time I opened my mouth at dinner, my grandmother's fragile smile stopped the words in my throat, over and over again. 3 days passed, and somehow, without ever formally proposing, David and my mother had a date circled on the kitchen calendar. I told myself I'd fix it once Grandma Eleanor was stronger. A small lie I repeated so often I almost believed it myself. Back in Chicago, Maya sensed the distance growing between us and asked plainly whether I regretted anything from our summer together. Never, I said, meaning it completely. But the word felt heavier now, tangled up with a secret I hadn't found the courage to unravel. My mother started calling daily, asking about menus and dresses, and each call chipped away at the wall I'd built to protect Maya. I finally told Priya everything. The engagement pressure, the unspoken lie. And she said bluntly that silence was its own kind of cruelty. You're not protecting anyone, she warned. You're just delaying the moment it explodes. And it will explode eventually. Jenna. And I knew she was right. Maya and I fought for the first time that August. Not loudly, but with the kind of quiet hurt that lingers longer than shouting. I feel like your secret, she said, tears in her eyes. Like something you love in private but won't claim in daylight. And I had no answer. I promised her I would tell my parents soon. That I just needed the right moment. And she nodded. Though her eyes said she'd heard that before. September came. And my grandmother's condition stabilized enough that the family shifted focus fully onto wedding planning, gaining unstoppable momentum. My mother booked a venue without asking me, insisting it was a surprise. And I stared at the confirmation email feeling completely erased. I drove to see Maya that night, planning finally to tell her I would end the charade. But she wasn't answering her phone. I found her at her apartment packing a bag. Her mother's diagnosis had worsened, stage 3. And she was flying to Texas for treatment support. I can't keep doing this halfway, she said quietly, folding a sweater. Not while my mom is sick and you're planning someone else's wedding.
I begged her to understand
that the wedding wasn't real. That I loved only her. But the words sounded thin even to my own ears. Then prove it, she said. Tell your family the truth before I get back. Or I don't know what we're building here anymore. She left for Texas the next morning. And Chicago suddenly felt enormous and hollow. Every street corner reminding me of her. I called my mother that week, rehearsing the truth a dozen times. But panic closed my throat every time I tried to begin. Instead I asked to postpone the wedding date, citing my career. And my mother agreed reluctantly, buying me time I didn't know how to use. Maya and I texted daily while she was away, caring for her mother through chemotherapy. Exhausted. Scared. Holding her family together almost alone. I wanted desperately to fly down and help her. But I was terrified of what questions that trip would raise back home. I wish you were here, she wrote one night. And I typed and deleted a dozen replies before finally sending. I wished that too. 3 weeks turned into 6. And the distance between us stretched thin, filled with unfinished sentences and love neither of us could fully practice. My father, sensing my hesitation about David, sat me down and asked plainly if something else was going on that I wasn't telling them. I almost told him everything right there. But my mother walked in discussing centerpieces, and the moment dissolved before I could catch it. Priya visited that October and found me crying over wedding invitation samples, and she finally said what she'd been holding back for months. You're going to lose her, she said simply, and you'll spend the rest of your life pretending David makes you as happy as she did. That night I booked a flight to Texas without telling anyone, determined to finally choose honestly instead of choosing comfortably for once. I found Maya in a hospital hallway, exhausted, hair pulled back, eyes red from days of little sleep, and she looked up in disbelief. You came, she whispered, and I said of course I did. That I was done letting fear write the story of my own life. We talked for hours in the hospital cafeteria, and I told her everything. The fake engagement, my mother's plans, my own cowardice, all of it. I'm ending it, I said. The moment I'm back in Cedar Falls, I'm telling them the truth. No more borrowed time. I promise you. She looked at me carefully, guarded but hopeful, and said she needed to see it, not just hear it, before she could fully trust it. Her mother's treatment showed promising signs that week, and for the first time in a month, Maya allowed herself to breathe a little easier. I flew home determined, rehearsing the conversation on the plane, imagining every possible reaction, bracing myself for my parents' disappointment. At dinner that Sunday, I finally said it plainly. I'm not marrying David. I'm in love with someone else. Her name is Maya. The table went silent. My mother's fork frozen halfway to her plate. My father's jaw tightening in a way I'd never seen before. A woman, my mother repeated slowly, like the word itself was foreign, and I nodded, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. My father stood abruptly and left the room without a word, and my mother's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. After everything we've given you, she said quietly, this is how you repay us. Embarrassing this family in front of everyone we know. I tried to explain that loving Maya wasn't a betrayal, that hiding it had hurt far more than any truth ever could. But she wouldn't listen. My grandmother, still recovering, was told the news the next day, and I braced myself for the worst reaction of all. Instead, to my shock, she asked to speak with me alone, and took my hand with a strength I hadn't seen from her in weeks. Sit down, she said. There's something about me you never knew. Something I buried for 60 years because the world wasn't ready. She told me about a woman named Ruth, a friend from her nursing school days, someone she'd loved fiercely and never been allowed to keep. I married your grandfather because it was safer, she said. And I told myself I was happy. But some nights I still think of her. Her confession cracked something open in me. A family secret hidden for 2 generations. Proof that fear had cost our family before. Don't do what I did, she said, gripping my hand. Don't spend 60 years wondering what your life could have been if you'd been brave. I left her room in tears, both grieving the years she'd lost and clinging to the blessing she'd just quietly given me. My mother, however, wasn't ready to soften, and word spread fast through Cedar Falls once David's mother learned the engagement was truly off. Whispers followed my parents at church, and my mother, humiliated, blamed me openly for the gossip now trailing her every conversation. I flew back to Chicago heartbroken but resolved, choosing Maya fully even without my parents' blessing, trusting that love mattered more than approval. Maya's mother finished her first round of treatment with good results, and Maya finally flew home to Chicago, exhausted but relieved. We reunited at O'Hare, and I told her everything that had happened, the confession, my father's silence, my grandmother's stunning secret. You actually did it, she said, holding my face in her hands, disbelief and pride mixing in her voice. You actually told them. For a while, life steadied. We moved in together that winter, building the kind of ordinary happiness neither of us had dared imagine before. But my mother's silence stretched on for months. No calls, no texts, just a wall of hurt pride I didn't know how to break through. Priya warned me that some families take years, not months, and that I needed to grieve that possibility instead of chasing constant reconciliation. I threw myself into work, landing a major campaign at the agency, trying to fill the ache my mother's absence left behind. Maya finished her nursing program that spring, landing a position at a hospital downtown, proud and exhausted after years of impossible sacrifice. We celebrated quietly, just the 2 of us, toasting with cheap champagne in our small apartment, grateful for how far we'd come together. Then, unexpectedly, my father called. Just once, gruff and awkward, asking only if I was happy, and I said yes. Truly happy. That's something, he said before hanging up, and it wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a door left open just a crack. My mother remained distant, but Grandma Eleanor visited us that summer, sitting at our small table, admiring how at ease we were together. You remind me of Ruth, she told Maya quietly, and Maya, not knowing the story, simply smiled and squeezed her hand gently. I told Maya the whole story that night, my grandmother's lost love, and Maya cried, calling it the saddest, most beautiful thing she'd ever heard. We decided together that we wouldn't let fear write our story the way it had written my grandmother's, no matter what it cost us. That fall, Maya proposed to me on the same lakeshore where we'd first said I love you, kneeling in the same fading light. I said yes before she even finished the question, both of us laughing through tears. The lake wind wrapping around us just like before. We told my grandmother first, and she wept openly, saying she finally felt like some small part of Ruth got to live on through us. My father surprised us by asking to walk me down the aisle. Quiet, awkward gesture that meant more than any speech could. My mother still hadn't spoken to me directly in nearly a year, and I stopped expecting an invitation to soften that silence. Then Priya, without telling me, drove to Cedar Falls and sat down with my mother, refusing to leave until she truly listened. You're going to lose her forever, Priya told her plainly. The way Eleanor lost Ruth. Except this time you get to choose differently. My mother called me that night, voice shaking, and said only, "Tell me about the wedding." And I nearly dropped the phone in shock. It wasn't an apology. Not fully. But it was an opening. And I decided to walk through it with as much grace as I could manage. We met for coffee the following week. Tense and careful. But for the first time in a year, she asked real questions about Maya. She makes me happy. Mom, I said simply. The way you always wanted for me. Just not in the shape you expected. My mother looked down at her cup for a long moment, then admitted quietly that pride had cost her a year she couldn't get back. She didn't fully understand. Not yet. But she agreed to come to dinner. To actually meet Maya as a person. Not a headline. That dinner was awkward and stiff at first. But by dessert, my mother was asking Maya about nursing school. Genuinely curious despite herself. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Just a small, fragile beginning. But after a year of silence, I would take fragile beginnings gladly. Just as things seemed to be settling, an old complication resurfaced. One I never expected to walk back into our lives at all. David, apparently still hurt from the broken engagement, showed up at my office unannounced, asking to talk. His expression unreadable. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said. "I just need to understand what I did wrong. Why I wasn't enough for you." I explained gently that it had never been about him at all. That I'd been running from myself long before I ever met Maya. He listened quietly, then admitted he'd always sensed something unspoken between us. Some distance he could never quite name or close. "I hope she makes you happy," he said finally, extending a hand. And for the first time, our old tension dissolved into simple peace. I told Maya about the visit that evening, and instead of jealousy, she just laughed softly and said closure looked good on me. 2 weeks before the wedding, my grandmother's health declined sharply again, and the doctors warned us gently that time might be short. We moved the ceremony up, small and quick, held right in her hospital room, so she could witness it with her own eyes. My mother helped pin flowers into my hair that morning, her hands trembling, tears she no longer tried to hide slipping down her cheeks. "I should have said this sooner," she whispered, "but I'm proud of you for being braver than I ever managed to be." We exchanged vows beside my grandmother's hospital bed, her frail hand gripping mine throughout, tears of joy replacing the tubes and machines around her. "Ruth would have loved this," she whispered when it was over, closing her eyes with a peace I hadn't seen on her face in years. My father stood in the corner, quietly crying. The man who once left the dinner table without a word now unable to stop smiling. Maya's mother, healthy again after months of treatment, flew in just in time, embracing me tightly, calling me her daughter without hesitation. Priya stood beside us as maid of honor, grinning through happy tears, reminding everyone that she'd known this moment was coming for over a year. That night, surrounded by the family we'd nearly lost and the family we'd built anyway, I finally understood what my grandmother had tried to teach me. Grandma Eleanor passed away peacefully 3 days later, holding a small photograph of Ruth that she kept hidden in her jewelry box for decades. At her funeral, my mother placed that photograph gently inside the casket, whispering that some love deserved to finally rest without secrets. I gave the eulogy, telling the story of Ruth for the first time publicly, honoring the courage my grandmother never quite found for herself. She taught me that silence protects no one, I said, looking at Maya in the front row. It only postpones the people we could have been. After the funeral, my mother hugged Maya for the first time, holding on a beat longer than necessary, an apology in the gesture itself. "Thank you for loving my daughter enough to wait for us," she said quietly. And Maya, surprised, simply nodded and hugged her back. Life slowly found its new rhythm after that. Holidays awkward but present. My mother learning, imperfectly, how to ask about our life together. Maya thrived at the hospital, earning a promotion within the year, finally stepping fully out of the financial shadow that had shaped her childhood. I left the agency to start my own small design studio, something Maya had encouraged for months before I finally found the courage. We hosted our first real holiday dinner that December. My parents at one end of the table, Priya and Maya's mother at the other, watching my father pass mashed potatoes to Maya's mother, laughing at some joke I couldn't quite hear. I nearly cried into my plate. My mother pulled me aside in the kitchen, admitting she still had more to learn, but that she never wanted another year of silence again. "I almost lost you the way Eleanor lost Ruth," she said. "I won't make that mistake twice. Not for pride. Not for anything." That winter, we adopted a scruffy sheltered dog Maya named Beans, and our small apartment finally felt completely, unmistakably like a home. David sent a wedding gift months late, a framed photo of the four of us from college, with a note simply saying, "Glad you found her." Priya, inspired by everything she'd witnessed, finally came out to her own family that spring, crediting our story for giving her the courage. I realized then how far one honest choice could ripple outward, touching lives I never expected our small rainy night beginning to reach. Maya and I visited Ruth's old nursing school records that summer, tracking down a faded photograph of two young women laughing together. We had it framed and hung it beside our wedding photo. Two generations of love finally allowed to exist in the same room. My father started attending a support group for parents of LGBT children, quietly, without telling me, until my mother mentioned it one afternoon. "He wanted to understand better," she said. "He didn't want to keep failing you the way he almost did that first night." Slowly, the family that once nearly broke over one dinner table confession became the family that showed up for every anniversary since. On our second anniversary, we returned to the same taxi company where Maya still occasionally picked up shifts for extra cash, just for fun. We asked the dispatcher, laughing, if we could recreate that first rainy ride, and he assigned us Maya's old cab without question, sitting in the back seat together, laughing at how far we'd come. I realized the destination I'd forgotten that night had been her all along. My grandmother's story, once a secret buried for 60 years, became something I told openly now. A warning transformed finally into a blessing. We started volunteering together at a local LGBT youth center, hoping to shorten the distance other young people might have to travel toward acceptance. A teenager there once asked me if it gets easier, and I told her honestly, gets braver. And bravery eventually becomes easier. Maya's career flourished, eventually leading a nursing team at her hospital, proof that the years of sacrifice had built something lasting and real. My design studio grew steadily too, and one of my proudest projects became the branding for that same youth center we loved. On quiet nights, Maya and I still drive along the lake sometimes, windows cracked, radio low, chasing that same feeling from years ago. My mother calls every Sunday now, without fail. Sometimes just to ask about Beans, sometimes to ask about us, always with real warmth. My father keeps that college photo David sent framed in his office, telling coworkers proudly about his daughter and her wife whenever it comes up. Looking back, I understand now that the twist was never really the secret, but the courage it eventually forced every one of us to find. Grandma Eleanor never got her Ruth. Not fully. Not openly. But through us. Some quiet part of that lost love finally got to live. I think about that rainy night constantly. How close I came to simply thanking the driver and walking away without ever looking back. Instead, I looked up, met her eyes in that rearview mirror, and somehow, impossibly, found my way home instead of my original destination. Some love stories begin with fireworks, but ours began with rain, a stalled meter, and a question I never actually answered. Years later, I finally know the answer to where to, and it was never an address at all. It was simply, always, her. This is our story. Imperfect and hard one. Proof that honesty costs everything at first and eventually gives back so much more. Vandy.